Early 2026 just shattered every illusion we had about the global order. We saw the kinetic capture of Venezuelan President Maduro. We watched Operation Epic Fury, the US and Israeli decapitation strike on Iran. But the most important geopolitical event of the decade didn't happen on a battlefield. It happened in a server rack. The President of the United States just formally blacklisted Anthropic, a multi-billion-dollar American AI company designated as a national security threat. Why? Because Anthropic refused to let their AI, Claude, power fully autonomous weapons. But here's the brutal physical reality. During the strikes on Iran over the weekend, CENTCOM still used Claude. They used it for targeting. They used it for intelligence. Because the military's kill chain is deeply integrated into Palantir's Maven smart system. You cannot simply unplug the cognitive engine of the US military. The entire system collapses. I spent 6 years as a PhD candidate in experimental quantum physics, studying strongly correlated electron systems. That training wired me to see when a system fundamentally changes its state. Right now, the retail market is blindly treating AI like a software subscription. But the smartest capital knows what is happening. They just are not making YouTube videos about it. AI has undergone a phase transition. It has crossed the threshold from a digital tool into kinetic sovereign weapon. Welcome to Growth. I'm Sean, your guide to money and navigating the frontier of innovation. Today, we are stripping away the PR statements and the tech blog noise. We are going to look at the reality of the AI defense war. We will break down what actually happens when Silicon Valley's pacifist ideals violently collide with the reality of a military kill chain. We'll look at the massive blind spot of the $2 trillion tech monopolies and the private warlords who are quietly exploiting it to build a new era of autonomous weapons. You have already heard the headline. Palantir supplies the AI system to the Pentagon, and they embedded Anthropic's Claude to act as the brain. But let me explain how this system actually works in the physical world. The system is called the Maven Smart System. It operates inside the military's Impact Level 6 classified cloud environments, running directly on Amazon Web Service. Look at Operation Absolute Resolve in January. US Special Operations Forces surged into Caracas and captured Nicolas Maduro from his underground bunker. You do not execute a zero-casualty extraction of a head of state in the dead of night using human analysts staring at monitors. Maven ingested a massive ocean of drone feeds and satellite imagery to build a flawless pattern of life on the compounds before the boots even hit the ground. Now, look at Operation Epic Fury in Iran. In the first 24 hours, the US and Israel obliterated over 1,000 targets. They dismantled the IRGC command, struck missile launch sites, and completely erased 11 Iranian ships from the Gulf of Oman. How do you coordinate that kind of synchronized violence? You don't. The machine does. There are 6 steps in the military kill chain. Identify, locate, filter down to lawful, valid targets, prioritize, assign to firing units, and fire. Maven and Claude currently automate 4 of them. Before the B-1 and B-2 bombers even took off, the AI had already processed the classified data. Yellow outlined boxes on the Maven dashboard highlighted the potential targets. Blue boxes marked the no-strike zones to limit collateral damage. The system suggested the target, prioritized them by strategic importance, and issued the exact GPS coordinates. What used to take an intelligence team 12 hours now takes under a minute. During the Iraq War, targeting logistics required 2,000 personnel. Today, Maven completes the exact same task with 20 soldiers. It even evaluates the strike damage in real time, feeding that data right back into the loop. We have achieved targeting at machine speed. But this absolute compression of time creates a massive structural vulnerability. When you put a human operator in front of an AI that processes a kill chain in seconds, you trigger what researchers call automation bias. It is the fatal psychological tendency to accept computer-generated outputs without question. Human decision makers stop using their own expertise. They stop verifying. They blindly trust the machine. In military terms, this disrupts the entire chain of command. The algorithm stops being an advisory tool and silently becomes the de facto commanding officer. We are handing the steering wheel of global deterrence over to statistical inference engine. And this terrifying reality is exactly what is tearing Silicon Valley apart right now. Inside these hyperscalers, there is a massive philosophical civil war. Engineers are revolting. They are realizing that their large language models are being used to bypass human moral judgment, creating a massive responsibility gap. Externally, the pressure is just as violent. The Pentagon is demanding total integration, while regulators and the public are terrified of black box military operating with algorithmic opacity. The tech companies are fracturing under the weight of their own creations. They are struggling to reconcile the pacifist, open source ideals of Silicon Valley with the kinetic reality of the war room. This brings us to Anthropic. Anthropic was founded by researchers who defected from OpenAI because they thought the model were moving too fast. They built their entire corporate identity on constitutional AI. They explicitly trained their models to follow a rigid set of ethical principles. They weighted their algorithms with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. They literally hired moral philosophers to dictate what the machine could and could not do. They desperately wanted to be the ethical adults in the room. When the Department of Defense first integrated Claude into the Maven smart system, Anthropic demanded strict red lines. They strictly prohibited their models from participating in fully autonomous weapon systems. They argued that frontier AI systems are prone to hallucinations. They were terrified of what international relations scholars call the responsibility gap. If an AI autonomously orders a strike on a civilian target, who bears the moral responsibility? The algorithm, the engineer in San Francisco, the commander who wasn't even in the loop? Anthropic demanded that a human must always pull the trigger. It is a beautiful academic stance, but reality does not care about your philosophy. In the war room, ethics require compute. Compute requires time. And in combat, time, latency, is death. Look at the Pentagon's Golden Dome initiative, the space-based hypersonic missile defense system. If an adversarial glide vehicle breaches the atmosphere at Mach 15, you have roughly 90 seconds to calculate an intercept trajectory. You cannot have a human in the loop. You cannot afford the latency of a language model querying its internal ethical constitution before it fires a kinetic interceptor. The military demands what they call all lawful use, period. The Pentagon told Anthropic, "We buy products that kill people all the time. Hand grenades do not come with terms of service." And the US government responded with maximum kinetic force. The president designated Anthropic a supply chain risk. They dropped a legal mechanism originally designed for foreign adversaries. But here's the irony. The military's kill chain was already so utterly dependent on Claude that the administration had to grant the Pentagon a 6-month transition period. They literally couldn't unplug the AI without blinding their own forces. The Pentagon actively continued to use Claude embedded in its classified system during the ongoing strikes in Iran, despite the president's order. And overnight, Anthropic's entire ideological foundation collapsed. Watch how fast the pacifism dies when the survival of the company is on the line. Initially, CEO Dario Amodei drew a hard line. He published a memo refusing to compromise. But days later, the reality of the blacklist set in. He executed a violent 180-degree pivot. He issued a public apology for the tone of his memo. Suddenly, he is releasing statements emphasizing the existential importance of using AI to defend the United States. But the apology didn't work. The sovereign did not care. The Defense Department officially slapped Anthropic with the supply chain risk designation, legally locking them out of the entire federal government. So, facing the complete destruction of their business model, Anthropic played their last card. They just filed a massive lawsuit against the Department of Defense. They are literally trying to use civil courtroom in California to issue a cease and desist to the US military over a terms of service dispute. They are claiming their First Amendment rights were violated because the Pentagon won't let a tech company dictate how it fights a war. It is the ultimate proof that Silicon Valley fundamentally misunderstands sovereign power. They are caught in a trap between their pacifist origins and the ruthless math of global deterrence. They try to dictate terms to the strongest sovereign, and when the sovereign crushed them, they try to sue it. But in the war room, the only contract that matters is leverage, and Anthropic just realized they have none. The lawsuit isn't a strategy. It is simply the only game theory move they have left. Capital hates a vacuum. The exact moment Anthropic hesitated, OpenAI swooped in. They abandoned their non-profit, open-source origin. They agreed to integrate deeply into classified government systems. You have to step back and look at the sheer, ruthless audacity of OpenAI's pivot over the last 2 years. Why did they do it? Look at the math. The retail market thinks ChatGPT is the ultimate prize. But the reality is, consumer AI is raced to the bottom. You're charging a college student $20 a month to write essays, while the marginal cost of your compute is your entire margin. Models commoditize. Compute gets exponentially more expensive. But the defense sector, the US defense budget is a locked moat. You do not sell a monthly subscription to the Pentagon. You sell sovereign capture. Look at Palantir. Palantir does not own any foundational large language model. They don't sell a $20 chatbot to consumers, but they hold massive, multi-billion-dollar army contracts for systems like Maven. Palantir built an integration platform. They just plug in existing models, hardwiring them into classified military networks, and absorb the defense budget. OpenAI looked at Palantir's margins and realized they were playing the wrong game. If you can integrate your proprietary prompt libraries directly into military's Impact Level 6 classified environments, you become the indispensable operating system of the US military. OpenAI traded consumer PR for a permanent, unbreakable monopoly on the infrastructure of war. But dominating the software is only half the battle. Look at the center of the board, Elon Musk and xAI. The media is hyper-focused on the software. They look at Grok and they laugh. And yes, the software has friction. Grok is trained on X. It is designed to be unfiltered and chaotic. You cannot have a sarcastic, unpredictable AI running your precision kill chain. The military wants a lockdown, highly compliant, closed-source oracle. But if you think software glitch marginalizes Elon Musk, you do not understand the macro game. While the media was laughing at Grok, Musk quietly signed a $200 million contract to integrate xAI directly into the Pentagon's classified networks. And Musk doesn't even need Grok to be the primary targeting brain, because he understands what national security researchers define as the architectures of AI. AI is not just software. It is a physical tech stack encompassing data, connectivity, energy, and compute capacity. OpenAI and Anthropic are just writing code. They are brains in a jar. Musk owns the jar, and he owns the nervous system that connects it to the real world. Think about the physics of the kill chain. Palantir and OpenAI can build the smartest targeting algorithm on Earth in a Virginia data center. But how do you get that targeting data to a carrier strike group in the South China Sea in 12 milliseconds? You use Starlink, or more accurately, Starshield, SpaceX's militarized satellite network. Musk controls the orbital transport layer. The Pentagon has already locked in massive classified contracts worth nearly $2 billion just to build a persistent global surveillance swarm using his rockets and satellites. Let OpenAI take the regulatory hit of building the assassination software. Musk is just going to own the highway the data has to travel on. And then there's Google. From a pure engineering perspective, Google should own this entire space. They have the deepest talent pool on Earth. They literally invented the transformer architecture that makes all of this possible. They have the custom tensor processing units to run AI at scale. So why are they lagging behind Palantir and OpenAI in defense dominance? Because of the scar tissue of 2018. When the Pentagon first tapped Google for Project Maven to analyze drone footage, the Google workforce revolted. Thousands of employees protested, and Google caved, dropping the contract. For years, Google pretended they were out of the defense game. They are a $2 trillion monopoly built on global consumer information and advertising. They wanted to protect their consumer PR and avoid another employee uprising. But you cannot just ignore an $850 billion defense budget. So Google quietly crept back in. They secured a piece of the joint warfighting cloud capability contract. They built the Google Distributed Cloud, specifically for the military's top secret Impact Level 6 environment. And yes, they quietly slipped Gemini into the Pentagon's warfighting platforms. But here's the structural penalty for their hesitation. Because Google tried to play both sides, appeasing pacifist employees in public while taking DoD money in private. They lost their first mover advantage. This is the civil war of hyperscalers. Anthropic tried to enforce morality and was blacklisted. Google tried to play the pacifist and lost its dominance to faster, more ruthless operators. Elon Musk abandoned the software wars to monopolize the physical transport layer. And OpenAI is executing total sovereign capture to become the operating system of the Pentagon. They are no longer just tech companies. They are sovereign defense primes. But there is the blind spot of the hyperscalers. OpenAI and Google are fighting over the brain. They are building the smartest cognitive engines in the cloud. But you cannot eliminate a physical target with a cloud computer cluster. You need kinetics. You need the physical execution layer. And while the massive $2 trillion tech monopolies are desperately trying to manage their consumer PR and appease their shareholders, a complete different breed of predator has entered the board. The VC-backed vertical defense startups. These companies do not have consumer apps. They do not care about App Store rankings. They don't have college students writing essays on their platforms. They're private, they're ruthless, and they exist for one single purpose: to build autonomous kinetic weapons. Look at companies like Anduril and Shield AI. They're executing a completely different game. They're not trying to build artificial general intelligence. They're building vertical moats around edge compute and a treatable mass. A treatable is Pentagon speak for disposable. The Department of Defense launched an entire program for this called the Replicator Initiative. The explicit goal of Replicator is to rapidly deploy multiple thousands of treatable autonomous systems across multiple domains. In the old world, the legacy metal benders build $100 million fighter jets. If you lose one, it is a national tragedy. In the new world, these vertical startups are printing AI-piloted drones out of fiberglass and commercial motors to feed the Replicator program. They cost a fraction of the price, and they are rolling them off the assembly lines by tens of thousands. And here's the terrifying part. They do not need a constant connection to Starlink or an Impact Level 6 cloud to pull the trigger. These companies are putting the AI directly onto the silicon inside the drone. It is called edge compute. This isn't science fiction. Shield AI has an autonomous software platform called HiveMind. It uses onboard edge computing to let a swarm of drones independently perceive their surroundings, make decisions, and execute missions even when GPS and communications are completely jammed by the enemy. Anduril is doing the exact same thing with their Lattice software. They're building the autonomous operating system for disposable strike vehicles and jet power interceptors. You launch a swarm of 1,000 drones. They communicate with each other using localized neural networks. They hunt autonomously. This is the ruthless math of modern warfare. If an adversary has to fire $2 million missile to shoot down a chip edge compute drone swarm, the adversary goes bankrupt. It is an economic checkmate. The hyperscalers are building the macro strategy layer for the generals in Washington. But these private warlords are building the physical swarm for the front lines. They are doing it with zero PR friction, and they are backed by billions of dollars of Silicon Valley venture capital that has completely lost its pacifist guilt. This isn't just American story. If AI is the new apex weapon, then no developed nation on Earth can afford to rent their weapons from a server rack in California. Imagine you're Macron in France or the president of South Korea. You're watching the US government weaponize Anthropic. You're watching them lock down OpenAI. You realize instantly, if Washington decides to cut the fiber optic cable or revoke your API access, your military goes blind. This is triggering the sovereign AI race. Traditional US allies are realizing they must build their own localized national cognitive engines. And no one is executing this more aggressively right now than South Korea. South Korea is treating AI development like wartime mobilization. The President Lee just launched a $700 billion sovereign AI initiative. Why? Because relying on foreign AI models for defense and national infrastructure is an unacceptable threat to their sovereignty. They cannot risk their greed or their military being shut off by an American tech CEO. So they're building it themselves. They didn't just hire bureaucrats. They literally drafted the chief architects and lead engineers from their largest domestic tech monopolies and installed them directly inside the government. They struck a massive geopolitical deal with NVIDIA to secure 260,000 advanced Blackwell GPUs. They took 50,000 of those chips just to build a national AI computing center for the state. and they mandated their elite domestic tech giants to build foundational models entirely from scratch, free from any Western licensing restrictions. This is the new geopolitical reality. Compute is the new uranium. And the countries that cannot secure the chips, the energy, and the sovereign AI models to refine it will become digital vassal states. Let's step back and look at the actual macro picture. Retail investors are still treating OpenAI and Google like their software service companies, selling monthly software subscriptions. But the smartest capital, they are already pricing in sovereign capture. They know these entities are no longer just tech companies. They are the new architecture of state power. Silicon Valley's era of pacifism is dead. The tech monopolies that tried to enforce their own morality were crushed by the state. The ones that survive will execute total sovereign capture. They are fusing their cognitive engines to the Pentagon, while billionaires monopolize the orbital transport layer, and private VC warlords flood the physical battlefield with disposable, autonomous hardware. And every allied nation on Earth is frantically hoarding compute and energy so they don't get caught in the crossfire. We're looking at a civilizational reset. For 7 years, global deterrence was physical. It was grounded in the terrifying, tangible reality of nuclear warheads sitting in concrete silos. Deterrence worked because it was based on game theory played by humans. We understood human fear. We relied on the human capacity for doubts and hesitation. But when you hand the initiation of violence over to a machine, that game theory permanently breaks. Intelligent machines do not possess a tragic imagination. They do not feel the weight of a casualty report. They simply execute a statistical inference engine trying to optimize a win probability metric. If a neural network calculates that a preemptive strike yields a 51% strategic advantage, it doesn't blink. It just runs through. For a century, the global order survived because people with their fingers on the button were terrified of the consequences. So here's the real question for you. What happens to the global order when the ultimate weapon doesn't even know what death is? Let me know your take in the comments below. This was Sean from BySpark. If you enjoyed the video, press like, subscribe, and don't forget the notification. And if you want the deep dive report with the full citations and market breakdown, subscribe to our newsletter at the link below. Thank you for watching. Until next time.